you so much for joining us live today or for reviewing the recording on demand afterwards. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. So, after analyzing more than 12,000 requirements from various sectors, we've gained some fresh insights into what could hamper project success. From this analysis, we're really excited to continue with Rec Insights, our three-part webinar series. Continuing with today's presentation, Mastering Requirements, a deep dive into automation and accuracy, part 2. But first, a little bit about us. So we are QRA Corp, and we're based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, which you can see in a nice big aerial view of our downtown and harbor here. Our product, QBScribe, is used across various industries like oil and energy, automotive, medical services, and we help teams write clear and more consistent requirements in less time. And we do this by providing feedback on quality analysis for individual requirements, and as well overall consistency of language and units across a document. Now, a little bit more about myself. So my name is Morgan Costal, and I am your presenter today. I'm a customer success manager here at QRA, and I'm super excited to be presenting some of the results from our Rec Insights projects to you folks. I have prior experience working in technical sales and support for customers in the neurotechnology and security industries. And I've also worked as a research device vendor, which gives me a unique perspective when it comes to requirements writing. My role at QRA is to support the success of teams and users who are starting to incorporate QBScribe into the requirements workflow. I'm also one of the customer success team members who helps provide training sessions and information sessions around what exactly makes a good requirement. Now, who are you? You are likely requirements leaders and authors, eager to learn more about our Rec Insights project and how you could potentially integrate our findings into your everyday and your teams. Whether you're a technical manager, systems engineer, a requirements engineer, a business analyst, or just someone who really loves requirements, I hope that you find something useful and informative from our three-part webinar series. Some of the topics that we will cover throughout this three-part webinar series includes common characteristics of a good requirement and an introduction to QBScribe's problem types and why they are important. This is what we covered in the part 1 of the series. We will also cover the collective results of our Rec Insights project, as well as any industry-specific trends for various measurements. We will also cover how our tool QBScribe can be used to identify potential problems within your requirements and then help remediate them. If you saw the first part of this webinar series, thank you so much. It's really fantastic to see you here again today. You already have some background on why we started the Rec Insights project and the methodology behind it. If you didn't see the series, no worries at all. You can always watch the video on demand via the link up here. For the Rec Insights project, our team analyzed 50 documents with nearly 13,000 requirements across various industries. And we wanted to try to see if there were any emerging trends or insights that we can gather from this data. We used our tool QBScribe to run the following 3 analyses on the requirements: quality analysis, similarity analysis, and ears conformance. We also identified the top 5 problem types for each document. And then we segmented the results by all of the following industries to see if there are any trends when it comes to the top 3 problem types, the quality analysis score distribution, ears conformance, and the similarity analysis. However, for this second part of the webinar series, we will focus on the collective results from this analysis, and we will touch on the industry-specific trends in the third and final part of the series. If you've seen the previous part of this webinar, you know that I believe it's really good practice to check yourself before you wreck yourself. Catching any problems in your requirements as early on in the process as you can is so key to avoiding the impact of bad requirements further on in your project or product. In the previous webinar, we also discussed in great detail what exactly makes a good requirement. Based on our research and our knowledge of our clientele, we've determined 4 common characteristics of a good requirement. These may be similar to those that you have in your organization, and there may be overlap with other characteristics that you have identified. But I think that we can all agree that a requirement should be complete, verifiable, unitary, and clear. We also had a bit of a preview in the previous webinar into the top 3 characteristics that we found authors had trouble with in the documents that we analyzed, which were complete, clear, and unitary. And these are due to prevalent QB-Scribe problem types of no imperatives, cross-referencing pronouns, and multiple imperatives. As a reminder, a requirement should have one and only one imperative, which is why they're considered QB-Scribe problem types. And cross-referencing pronouns should be avoided because they refer to an object or person without explicitly being clear about who or what. This would be words like she, it, and that. And now we can dive a bit deeper into this to take a look at the problem type distribution and the rest of the results. So we found that on average, 27% of requirements had no imperatives at all. 25% of requirements had cross-referencing pronouns. And 19% contained multiple imperatives. And we do see an interesting distribution of the problem types for the entire data set. We've already covered the top 3 here, and we've covered all of these in quite a bit of detail in the last webinar series. But I figured I would give a bit of a quick overview of each one as we see the distribution and the distribution percentages on the screen right now. So, closely following our top 3, we have excessive continuances and optional escape clauses at 17%. While continuances like and or are not inherently a problem in requirements, the excessive use of them impacts whether or not the requirement is unitary. Optional escape clauses are words like as required, may, and appropriately, which make requirements really difficult to test. Superfluous infinitives, which is at 15%, are words like be able to, allow, and consider, which once again impact the ability to test the requirement. At 12%, we have vague words. And vague words are, well, they're vague. So they introduce uncertainty within the requirement, making it unclear. This would be words like maybe common or typical. At 9%, we have non-specific temporal words. And these imply a timing constraint without giving one, like the words immediately or eventually, which are not testable. At 8%, we have immeasurable quantification and open-ended clauses. Open-ended clauses like etc. lead to incomplete requirements that do not have all of the information available by alluding that there is maybe more required without actually stating what. Immeasurable quantification are words that indicate unmeasurable quantification, like great, small, and approximately. And finally, we have negative imperatives at 5%. And really, instead of saying what a system shall not do, it's so much better to explicitly state what a system shall do. Next, we have quality warnings, and they're another problem type within QB-Scribe, but are categorized differently. This is because they depend so heavily on the context. They're still very important to note, but think of them more of like an FYI as opposed to inherently being flagged as wrong. The top quality warning that we have here is passive voice. And it's totally fine to have this warning if the subject, object, and verb is abundantly clear in the requirement. The next quality warning is universal quantifiers at 22%. And this is words like any. If you truly mean any in the context of your requirement, then it's correctly being used. If not, you should really rewrite the requirement so it's more clear. Then we have incomplete sentences and justification that were not very prevalent in the requirements we analyzed, sitting at 2% and 1% respectively. Justification is essentially extra information in the requirement that it doesn't need to be there. And incomplete sentences are where the object, action, or subject are either poorly defined or completely missing. As we know, there are some individual differences when we look at the industry-specific data, and we're going to be covering that in the next part of the series. But this is the collective data we're talking about. And I am curious to hear your thoughts on the top 3 problem types you think your team encounters the most often. So if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, please go ahead and do so, or you can reach out to me afterwards to share. So we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, but the QV-Scribe problem types can be mapped to the 4 generally agreed upon characteristics of a good requirement, like complete, verifiable, unitary, and clear. So for example, if you have one and only one imperative, your requirement is complete and unitary. If you do not have any cross-referencing pronouns, your requirement is clear. But what we can also do is map this to the problem type distribution that we looked at previously. So authors had the most trouble making sure that requirements are complete, clear, and unitary via no imperatives, cross-referencing pronouns, and multiple imperatives. However, issues with verifiability were certainly still present, with optional escape clauses and superfluous infinitives falling at 17 and 15% respectively. This shows that authors do have some troubles with all 4 characteristics of a good requirement, just at varying degrees that we can measure looking at the QV-Scribe problem types. For quality warnings, complete requirements were the top concern here with the passive voice. But once again, with all of these quality warnings, they depend so heavily on the context. All of these problem types that we have covered have different weightings when it comes to the QV-Scribe quality score. Something like no imperatives will have a much larger impact than something like excessive continuances, and the quality warnings will have no impact at all. When we talk quality scores, what we really mean is that each individual requirement is analyzed for these different problem types. The severity of the problem type is accounted for, and then a score is assigned, with a 5 out of 5 score being very low risk for misinterpretation, and a 1 out of 5 score being a very high risk of misinterpretation. I like to think of this as a traffic light. So if you have a 5 out of 5 score, it's green, which means that you are good to go. If you have a 1 out of 5 score and it's red, you need to stop and take some time to figure out what the critical problems are. And when we look at the collective data set, this is the quality score distribution, with over half of the requirements receiving a 1 out of 5 score, showing half of these requirements had critical problems that needed to be investigated and remediated. A quarter of the requirements had a 5 out of 5 score, showing that only a quarter of these requirements were complete, clear, unitary, and verifiable. And we had an average of 2 out of 5 for the document's QV-Scribe quality score. Next, The requirements were analyzed at the individual level to determine conformance to one of these 5 EARS templates. So EARS stands for the Easy Approach to Requirements Syntax, and it is one of the most common writing syntax that requirements engineering teams follow. It provides a framework for authors so they can focus much more on the content of the requirement as opposed to the structure or syntax. In standardization of this requirement syntax, it helps with much quicker reviews, avoiding common pitfalls like ambiguity, being overly wordy, and lack of singularity. Across the 50 documents, we found that there was an average EARS conformance of 41%. The requirements that were not EARS conformant may have their quality score improved if we were to utilize EARS templates and rewrite them, thus bringing up the overall quality score of the document and the collective data set. However, it is important to note that EARS isn't always the right thing to do. Like if the requirement extends complexity, if you have more than 3 preconditions, and if the requirement is more mathematical in nature, EARS may not be the right choice. If you are interested in learning more about when not to use EARS, we do have this blog post here that I think would be very helpful. And I'd love to hear whether anyone in the audience is implementing EARS into the requirements writing process, or if there's another syntax structure that you're using. So please reach out to me afterwards or write in the chat with what you're using. Finally, each document was analyzed using QVScribe's similarity analysis to see whether there are any potential duplications or contradictions within the set of requirements. And with the nearly 13,000 requirements, 2,642 requirement pairs had over 90% similarity. And were then potential duplications or contradictions. And 6,667 requirement pairs shared 75 to 90% similarity. Now, these ones here, they may be appropriately similar or not, and they necessitate additional subject matter expertise and that human component to come in and determine any issues. But I will note that we were able to narrow down the 13,000 total requirements to just a couple thousand pairs that really need your attention, and around 6,000 pairs that probably could use an extra set of eyes to look at, but are a lot less pressing in nature. So now that we've gone through the collective results for the Rec Insights project, I wanted to take some time to showcase how QVScribe can be used to detect these potential problems and assist authors. I like to say that it is often easy to write a bad requirement and hard to write a good requirement. But QVScribe really does help flip that switch by automating the process and making it easy to write a good requirement and hard to write a bad requirement. QVScribe has integrations with Microsoft Office, Word, and Excel, as well as Polarian, Doors Next Generation, and JAMA. And in exciting news, QVScribe is actually now available in Mac for Polarian, Doors Next Generation, and JAMA. For today's walkthrough, I'll actually be going through in QVScribe for Polarian to showcase. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen here. Perfect. All right, so now I'm working in a pacemaker system specification. And I'll start by opening up the summary view of QVScribe to get an idea of all of the different analyses that we have run. We can see that this document has an overall score of 3 out of 5, which is slightly higher than the average of 2 out of 5. First, we're going to take a look at the quality analysis. And what we can do here is filter by the different types of problems that we might see in the requirements. And because the top 3 that we found in Rec Insights were no imperatives, cross-referencing pronouns, and multiple imperatives, I'm going to sort by cross-referencing pronouns to see those requirements where that is present. Next, I'm going to take this and I'm going to sort these requirements from low to high so I can get the ones that maybe need that more attention immediately to my attention. And what I see here is requirement 889. And this requirement has a score of 1 out of 5. Let's see how we can potentially increase this score. So this requirement says, while in duration delay mode, when the ATR detection algorithm determines that atrial tachycardia is over, it shall enter pace down mode within 0.2 milliseconds and fallback shall be avoided. So this currently has a score of 1 out of 5. And you can see all of the alerts here for what is factored into that score. It contains multiple uses of the imperative shall, and we can see that that's highlighted as I click into these cards. And we have a cross-referencing pronoun of it, both of which were actually in the top 3 rec insights problem types for the collective results. We can also see that there is a passive voice warning here, which doesn't impact the quality score, if you remember, as it's super context dependent as to whether or not it's being used correctly. But it is bringing it to your attention. So just in case some organizations prohibit the use of passive voice, you can go in and use your knowledge to check whether or not it's being used correct. This is why there's still that human component to requirements writing, as additional information is needed. Finally, we have this EARS compliance check. And we can see that this requirement has been identified as a complex, state-driven, event-driven requirement. But in its current state, it is not compliant. We also see that there are 4 potentially similar requirements here with varying levels of similarity from 52% to 73%. If we were to click on any of these, we could see a nice side-by-side of the 2 requirements, where everything in purple is what is different, and everything not colored is what's the exact same. So giving you a quick snapshot of any potentially similar requirements. So how do we actually go about fixing this requirement? Well, just because we want to respect the status and edit permissions within Polarian, you can't edit here. You'll see it's not editable. But what we can do is open the requirement in a separate window, log me back in. Oh, 1 second here. Try that again. All right, take a look at that requirement here. We see this QV Scribe score scan icon here, which gives a nice overview of what the score was for this particular requirement. It does have a little lock here, which means it's locked for editing. But what we can do to check that is just press edit. And now we have the ability to edit this requirement. So I'll go ahead and open it. So where do we start? Well, let's say that after seeing this feedback from QV Scribe, I either go and talk to my team or use my subject matter expertise to understand that by switching to pace down mode, fallback is already avoided. So this is really redundant information within this requirement, so we can go ahead and delete it, and thus getting rid of this shall statement, the second shall statement. So since we have made changes to this requirement, we see that QV Scribe is updated in real time. So it was a 1 out of 5, and now it's a 3 out of 5, which is great. It means we're almost there. The remaining quality score alert we have here is this cross-referencing pronoun of it. And we need to be much more specific about what is going to be entering pace now mode, because right now it's not testable. We don't really know what needs to be accomplished for this requirement to work. So in this instance, we are talking about a pacemaker system. So I'm going to say that the pacemaker system shall enter pace now mode within 0.2 milliseconds. And success. Now we have a 5 out of 5 score for our QB Scribe quality score. And we've also made this EARS compliant, which is a great feature. This is just a great example how implementing EARS can greatly impact the quality of requirements writing. We have a very clearly defined precondition, trigger, system, and system response here. It's not overly wordy. This is a pretty good requirement. See how easy it is to write a good requirement with QBScribe? Since we've already covered the quality analysis and a bit of the ears, we've only touched on similarity a little bit. So I'm going to cover that quickly now. If I go back to this window, return to my summary view, I can take a look at similarity. So now I see a list of all of the similar requirements within my document. I can sort by highest percent match to see which ones need to be taken a look at, give that extra set of eyes that are more pressing. So I see that these two requirements here have a very high similarity. And when I go in and investigate, I see that it's actually 100% similarity. These are the exact same requirement. But the question is why? Why do we have duplicates? So let's go back to Polarian quickly and take a look at those two. And I see that requirement 772 is around a couple of requirements that refer to the pace now pace parameter. And requirement 786 is around a couple of requirements that refer to the POR pace parameter. So these are likely requirements that refer to very different parameters or states within the system specification. But in order to be understood, all of the information should really be in the requirement already. You shouldn't need to go in and look for more context like this. The requirement should be able to be removed from the document and be complete enough to make sense on its own. Manually checking for requirements that are potential duplications and contradictions like this is incredibly time consuming. Requirements 772 and 886 are only 14 apart, but QBScribe's similarity analysis will help with requirements that are even 100 or 1,000 apart. Then, just as I showed, you can easily navigate to the requirements in question to take a look at the context and see what information may or may not be missing and save a lot of time in your workflow. So as a summary, the Rec Insights project performed quality analysis, similarity analysis, and an ears conformance check on nearly 13,000 requirements via QBScribe. Our team identified the top 5 problem types for 50 documents. And in today's presentation, we went over the overall distribution of the problem types and the quality analysis score. We covered the overall ears conformance of these documents and what the breakdown was for the similarity analysis. Now that you have some insights into the collective results for the Rec Insights project, the next installment of the Rec Insights series will be in May 2024, where we will show an overview of the key findings for the industry-specific results with a focus on oil and energy, automotive, and medical devices. And then we will also go over best practices and techniques for remediating these common problem types. Once again, there will be a QBScribe focus for this. And we'll also go over some practical strategies to keep in mind when writing future requirements. Thank you so much for your attention today. Any questions at all?
Thanks, Morgan. That was amazing to watch. We did get a few questions come in throughout your chat. The first one is, can the maturity of a requirement process within an organization play a factor in the errors found?
Yes. So the maturity of an organization can definitely, or the requirements process in the organization can definitely play a factor, and help with the severity of the errors that are found in the requirements. With mature requirements processes, you are more likely to have clear, complete, and unambiguous requirements documentation. You are more likely to establish mechanisms for ensuring that there is consistency throughout. You're also more likely to have some change management procedures and govern how requirements are updated, reviewed, and approved through your process. And you're also more likely to leverage tools like QBScribe and automation to support the requirement engineering process.
Awesome, thank you. The second question is, what feature in QBScribe is the most valuable for the team to focus their efforts on incorporating in their workflows to improve some of these issues that you talked about today?
Ooh, That's a tricky one. I think I might be biased, but I think that all features in QVScribe are incredibly value. But if I did have to pick one, it would probably be quality analysis. And in particular for the feedback and the guidance that it provides, so you can understand the problem types, why they've been flagged, and start prompting authors to think of questions they can ask themselves as they start working on future requirements.
That makes sense. I also am partial to that feature. So, um, and this is our last question. And I think it kind of sets us up nicely for next week, actually. Can you provide examples of how misaligned requirements have impacted project intent and success in the specific sector or sectors?
Oh, okay. That's a big one too. Let's take the automotive industry, for example. And in the automotive industry, you're often, or you could be working on features like adaptive cruise control or automatic emergency braking, which really rely on quite complex interactions between sensors, actuators, and software algorithms. And misaligned requirements between engineering teams responsible for developing those types of systems can lead to inaccurate sensor calibration, which could cause some false alarms or failure to detect some hazards. It could also result in lack of coordination between these different systems, which could lead to unexpected behavior or inconsistent behavior within the systems. And then also, of course, with when you're working with automotive systems, you have people using them. So it can result in safety risk due to incomplete testing or validation of the system integration.
Perfect. And we did get actually one more question through, and
Yep.
you kind of covered it at the beginning, but I think it takes it one step further is, first of all, where were the requirements entered? So Polarian for this show and tell session. But the one question was, since your tool can interact with multiple tools,
Mhm.
are there any differences, different attributable differences in the tool in which they're entered? And I butchered that question, so I apologize to the person that asked it.
Okay, I think I've made way through that question. The majority of these requirements were entered in Microsoft Word and Excel, as a lot of teams are still kind of starting to digitize the requirements into RMTs like Java, Polarian, and Doors Next Generation. But really, in terms of QBScribe, there's no huge differences between the RMTs like Polarian, Java, and Doors Next Generation. It's really the individual RMTs user interface that's different, and how that is done is the difference. If you were to use QBScribe and Java and then have to use and switch over to Polarian, it would be a very, very, very similar user experience. I think I got that. Okay.
Yes, thank you for understanding what I was trying to say. I think that's all for the questions. Of course, if there's any that pop up afterwards, and if you share it with your team and they have any questions, please do reach out to us. We do appreciate you guys taking the time to join us today, and hopefully we'll see you in May.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.